Have I gone too far? Have I dabbled in domains that should not be trifled with? Could a single line destroy the old world as we know it? I think we're standing on the edge of something truly magnificent here. But are we also standing on the edge of sanity? Are we about to step into the abyss of madness with no way back? Let's find out, because it's time for a Warhammer the Old World Battle Report. Linehammer taken to the extreme. Boom. Look at that. It's a line of dwarves, and it almost stretches all the way across the table. So, first of all, I should probably let you know that my opponent for this game was fully aware that it was going to be against a mega line. The challenge was laid out at the local club. I said to people, I'm going to come up with the most ridiculous line I can. Let's try and break this thing. Make a horrible, unstoppable line. You bring something to try and deal with it. The only condition is that you have to bring something that will fight or try and defeat the line and not just hide from it. Because I have a feeling if this was taken to an event, certain players would look at it and think, I do not have the tools to deal with this line-based abomination, so I'm just going to hide in the corner. And I don't think that would be a very good game. So, with all that said, what is the ultimate line? Well, I should also say, by the way, that I don't think this is the ultimate line. I can go wider. I can make this an even more impressive abomination. But for the time being, I'll take you through what is in this initial meta-busting line. So, I've been running about 30 rangers in a single unit recently. Let's double it. Let's do 61 rangers in a single unit and see how that does. So, that unit with no characters in there whatsoever is 958 points. And there are going to be some characters in there. So, other than just the 61 rangers, obviously they've got all the upgrades: shields, great weapons, crossbows, throwing axes, full command, of course. The standard bearer has the rune of battle. And I'll explain the thinking behind all my choices in a moment, because we're trying to make this line immune to some of the issues that plague the line, because it's not unstoppable. It does have weaknesses, but we're going to try and minimise those weaknesses. So, who else do we have in the list? To make it legal, we need 2 other units that aren't heroes or war machines. So, I've got 2 minimum-sized units of dwarf warriors, 40 points each, and their role will be important as well. It may not seem like it, but they will have a role. Then we've got lots of characters. Let's go into some close-ups and find them all. So, first of all, we've got Burlock Daminton, the engineer who occasionally punches himself in the face and wounds himself, but his main role in there is to be a source of leadership 10, which is always good, and he also prevents the unit from being -1 to hit at long range. So if the enemy are far away, if I get the first turn, for example, I'm going to be able to shoot without that long range penalty. And I'll also explain in a minute why none of them start off in the line in deployment as well, and why Rangers are the perfect unit for this setup. Then we've got Thorgrim Ulleksson. I'm using the Belagar Ironhammer model. Thorgrim Ulleksson, what does he bring to the table? Well, he's a bit of a combat beast. He can do good damage with his weapon. He's got a ward save against multiple wound attacks. But, most importantly, when he drops his Grudge Stone on the battlefield, he makes any unit he's in unbreakable, which is a key part of this strategy, because when you're unbreakable, as long as he's alive, he doesn't get killed or kicked to the back rank or anything, then the only way that you're going to do anything to this unit to shift them is to make them give ground. And if we've got a piece of terrain right there, or if we've got small units of dwarf warriors right behind the line, then of course giving ground is not going to take them very far. And it's also not going to force them off the table, because if you fall back in good order with a line that fills up the entire table, you're not going to have a good time. There's a good chance, because of the bizarre rotations you're going to have to do, you will end up off the table. So I don't see a way of doing this without being unbreakable. I think it would be true madness to try that. So that's why Thorgrim Ulleksson is in there. So he's the general, another source of leadership 10. Then we've got a runesmith hanging out in the unit as well to give them an additional armor bane and flaming attacks. And then we've got the Thane BSB on shield bearers with the Master Rune of Grungni for the 5+ ward for the whole unit, and also another Rune of Battle. So with the 2 standard bearers and the 2 runes of battle, we're at 4 combat res just as a start. Obviously, this is not a close order unit, it's open order. But as soon as Thorgrim drops the Grudge Stone, we can't even move anyway. So the only thing we could do from that point is reform, so potentially face the other way. Then, I'm not sold on whether the Anvil is the right thing to put in this list, but I've got it here anyway, because I'm thinking let's try and buff up this unit as much as possible, and then put the rune to give them a better armor save and reroll armor saves as well. Because that would make them truly unstoppable, is my thinking there. But also, it is a bit of a target on its own. So certain opponents would be able to pick out the Anvil and not deal with the line, I think. So I don't know whether the Anvil is a long-term choice in this mega line. Probably better off just tooling up the Ranger unit, putting more Rangers in there, and maybe another fighty character or 2. Or maybe another Engineer or something. Just something cheap to accept challenges, perhaps. So, what else? Well, that's everything. That's the entire list. So. And. Nope. That was the video. Okay, so. They don't quite reach the edge, as you can see. I didn't want to have a unit that reached the edge on its own, because I'm going to put characters in there. And I wanted to stick to one line. However, there is a case to be made for having a second rank somewhat as well, because then you can refuse challenges and the character could be kicked into the second rank. And you will occasionally want to refuse challenges with this line, because there are certain enemies that if they get into a challenge will just stack up combat res on top of whoever you put in against them, and then that'll be enough to defeat you repeatedly. And eventually they'll eat through enough of your characters so that they will score points. So I think optimal line may feature a small second rank that you can... It's optional though, because depending on the opponent, if there isn't something in there you're really scared of challenging you, then you don't have to be concerned, or if the enemy are multi-charging you, then again you don't have to be too concerned about challenges because your attacks are going to be able to go into somebody. What would be a nightmare matchup for this? There are certain ethereal lists I think that this may struggle with, but ethereal units in general don't rack up a huge amount of combat res on their own. So, potentially could be dicey. There are certain things that can combo charge that would be difficult if you can throw in something really difficult next to a unit that's easier to kill, but is touching less of my frontage. So, for example, if you go in at one end with something that's really killy but also fragile, and then something really tanky a bit further along, and because it's technically the closest unit, this entire chunk of the line has to then hit the really tanky thing. So, there are ways you can deal with this. My opponent has obviously chosen to go wide to deal with it, and we'll see whether that works out, but it's the Warriors of Chaos. And before I go through that list, I'll just tell you quickly, I'm deploying outside of my deployment zone with the Rangers in scout mode. The reason is this piece of terrain here. So if I was to go in my deployment zone, the line would not actually fit all the way across because this terrain goes right up to the edge of the zone. So that's why the characters are going to have to walk in there in turn 1. But depending on the layout, you can of course set up in your own deployment zone with the big line of Rangers. Why are Rangers the perfect unit for the line? I can't think of too many other units in the game that are so potent at shooting and in combat at the same time. I don't know if there is another unit at all in the game. If there is, let me know. But crossbows, 30-inch range, so you don't have to move very much. The enemy kind of have to come to you unless they've got a good hiding spot. And if they do hide, you can always walk forwards before dropping the Grudge Stone from Thorgrim. And with the Anvil, if you've got that in the list as well, you can potentially move multiple times towards them as well and get into range if they're hugging the back. So, I think they're pretty much perfect for this. Anyone that charges in, especially if it's a wide unit, there's going to be so many crossbows or throwing axes used for the stand and shoot, that's going to be dealing significant damage before you even get there. And that does make me think that perhaps something with a very narrow frontage would be the thing to bring down the line, because not many of them would actually be able to see if you charge from really close by. But then again, if you're getting very close to them, if they haven't dropped the Grudge Stone yet, there's the possibility that they could then charge you. So you've got to watch out for that. Let's go through the Chaos Force and see, because remember, I did tell my opponent I was going to bring the ultimate line. I didn't go into the exact makeup of the list and which characters were going to be in there, so we'll see what the counter is here. We have got some Chosen of Chaos. We have got some cavalry, Marauder cavalry. We've got a Chaos Lord on Dragon. We have got some Forsaken. and they have lots of attacks, and they've got some kind of weird combat rules, and we've got 5 Chaos Knights. Also, we've got level 4 Sorcerer in with the Chosen. So we've got some... Under normal circumstances, these would be 2 very scary lines. They have the ability to, perhaps based on spellcasting, fly 36 inches as well, which means they could close the distance very quickly. But before we go into the actual game, let's have a look at the comments. So we've got the Honest Wargamer in here. Make it larger. It is possible that the line can be made bigger, yes. That is something that will happen at some point. Giovanni. We've got John. It is a fine evening. It's a fine evening to break Warhammer with a very long line. Robert says, wow. It is quite an impressive line. And finally catching one live, still need to name your dwarves. That is true. The thing is, I've been using named characters a lot lately. So obviously they don't need names. Roll the Initiative says, let's see, you're going to have to add comp to your events based on the line. So, Robert says, what about shooting? Will they all have to target the same thing? Yes, so let's go back to the wide shot. Weaknesses of the line. This massive unit can only shoot at one target, and most of them won't be able to see that one target. So I think it's a good trade-off though, because let's say this big unit of Forsaken walks forward up here and I start shooting them, I'm probably going to get like 20 shots into them. But not only can I do that once, also when they charge me I can do it again with the stand and shoot, and I'm happy to give up half the unit's shooting ability, because when we actually get into combat then all of them would be able to strike, and you're not going to wipe out this entire unit. What could potentially wipe out a unit this big in the first round of combat? Surely it would have to be a line of Chaos Warriors as long as the Dwarves are. The issue with that is that it's not manoeuvrable, and if you're a combat unit you have to actually move, whereas this line of Rangers does not have to move. You have to get round terrain, potentially, and often if there's terrain in the deployment zone that'll break your line. So maybe like a huge unit of Chaos Chosen with the spell that lets them fly. Potentially they could avoid terrain and land right in front of the line early on, but then they're still eating 2 shots before they get into combat. And if it's a line that stretches all the way across my line, that's going to be 60 crossbows shooting at you, and then 60 throwing axes when you do charge as well. So it's not going to be easy, but I think it's a fair trade-off, taking out half my own shooting at any particular target in order to get everyone fighting in combat. So let's go into turn 1. And I get turn 1, which allows me to put everyone into the line. And there is some thinking of the positioning within the line as well. I've not bunched up all my characters too much. I don't want the enemy to kill the characters. Now, they're quite difficult to kill. You've got, like, Thorgrim, Ulexon is going to benefit from the ward save as well. He's the one that you want to get rid of if you want to stop the Unbreakable. You want to get rid of the Runesmith if you want to drop the magic resistance and the armor bane and the flaming attacks. You want to get rid of the Thane BSB on shield bearers if you want to get rid of the ward save. That's the most wounds though, so that's going to be a tough one to shift. And if you want to get rid of the no -1 to hit at long range, you want to go for Burlock Daminson, who's there with his mighty hammer. Probably not the optimal target, because once you're close and you're fighting, you're not worried about me shooting at long range anyway. So you're probably not that concerned about killing Burlock, but I have got the BSB and the general Thorgrim Ulexon quite spread out. So there's not going to be too much focus of attacks on them. And I haven't set the Grudge Stone yet, because you have to do it at the start of the turn. And obviously I had to move up into the line with my characters turn 1. So anything that could target them now, this unit is not actually currently unbreakable. So there is some risk attached to deploying them outside the zone and moving in turn 1. So I shoot off the cavalry. And that's exactly what you'd expect to happen. There's like 25 of them shooting from here. Oh yeah, also, did I mention the Dwarf Warriors being right up against the back? I think I did mention them. So they are positioned so that the unit, when it gives ground, it will just hit them and stop. That's the whole purpose of the positioning of these 2 units. They're also kind of safe behind that line as well. And they're only 40 points, so even if both of them somehow got killed, then it would not give up a victory. So, turn 1 for Chaos. Steed of Shadow. So, the big line of Forsaken, of which there are 15, so it's not really that impressive a line compared to my line. is able to then fly 36 inches right in front of me. And is it 36 inches it can fly? I think it's less than that actually, because they're not in marching column. But it's at least 24 inches they can fly. Robert says, how come you didn't move the line up like half an inch so that woods you're almost touching wouldn't block line of sight? Well, it is a hill, this here. The reason I didn't move is because this is as far forward as I could go and still be within range for the characters to make a normal move into the unit in turn 1, so I couldn't quite reach the hill. So I'm not concerned about being on the hill, because it's only blocking the view of a few of the models, and I have a feeling the enemy are going to have to spend at least one turn on the hill anyway. But it depends on the terrain layout. Sometimes I would rather be in the deployment zone with the characters in there immediately, and then based on how close the enemy are, you could consider then moving. But the further you are away from your deployment zone, the more turns it's going to take for the characters to get in there, which is obviously a huge risk in this list when you've got nearly 1,000 points of ranges before the characters get there. So you don't want them getting killed before they become unbreakable. Or before they get their ward save. So we've got some Forsaken right in our faces, Chaos Knights as well. And the Chosen are a bit slower because they can't benefit from the same spell as the other unit. And then the Chaos Lord has moved right up as well. My first thought was that the Chaos Lord might actually want to attack the Anvil. But, on reflection, I don't know if that would be a good idea. Because that means you're throwing in 2 units. You've got the Forsaken and the Chaos Knights. I think those 2 units on their own would get absolutely destroyed by this line. And I think it would almost be a waste of time charging them in together without the sorcerer, without the Chaos Lord on Dragon. He is much tankier. He's also capable of racking up some overkill in a challenge, because combat res is going to be a very big deal against this. So I don't know how juicy the Anvil is actually as a target. In a tournament, you'd probably look for ways to kill the Anvil and just not fight the line at all. So I don't think the Anvil is optimal in this list, as I was saying. So yeah, that's the entire turn. It's a very quick game so far. I've only got 1 unit, so I can do 1 round of shooting. Phil says I have my first 2-day tournament tomorrow. Bum bum bum. Are you playing Dwarves by any chance? I would certainly hope so. So, turn 2 for me. And the shooting manages to kill, looks like 4 Forsaken with the crossbows. So obviously lots of them can't shoot because they're all the way at the other end of the line, but that's fine with me. And then when they charge in, I'll be able to throw a decent number of throwing axes at them. The closer the enemy is to you before they charge, the less stand and shoot models you're going to have, because less can actually see them. And you have to put all your stand and shoot into 1 unit, so there's going to be some wasted. So yeah, that's it for the entire turn. Not much, just stood still. I was pondering not dropping the Grudge Stone and instead charging the Forsaken. I then decided not to do that because I don't want to risk the combat going wrong, me just having bad dice and then being caught not unbreakable. Because I think 60 ranges full of these tough characters, unbreakable, I think that just makes it pretty much impossible for this Chaos list, I think. That's just my opinion. Because even if you get behind them and charge them in the rear, they're just one big fighting rank. So I don't know what that really achieves. It helps you combat res a little bit, but that means you're missing out on 1 turn of fighting. So, into the Chaos turn and Demonic Vigour. So there's lots of demonic buffs spells going off, and we've got triple charge going in. And here's an interesting thing about the line now. So if all these units make their charge, the dragon would go here. The line extends a good, 3 feet to the left of this picture. So, if there is no challenge, all those rangers would only be able to direct their attacks into the dragon, because it's the closest enemy unit. So, on the one hand, the dragon could just get absolutely murdered by that, because I'd be wounding the dragon on 6s, and when I roll 6s with the runesmith in the unit, that means that the attacks with the great weapons would be AP 5, so there's no armor save, you'd be straight onto the ward save then, so the dragon might not survive 35 ranger great weapon attacks, plus 1 supporting attack from each of the heroes on that side as well. So maybe you don't want that. So we'll see. Stand and shoot racks up 4 points already. 4 of the Forsaken killed with the throwing axes from stand and shoot, which is probably about what you'd expect from this many dwarves lobbing axes at them. There we go. Classic Warhammer combat resolution counter. Old school. And all the units make their charges. Then, this unit of Chaos Chosen move their way up as well. And They're obviously not able to charge yet because they were too far away, but they're ready for next time. And we were discussing, actually, during the game, whether they wanted to be, like, precisely 2 inches behind the rest of the line. Because then if I win combat and everyone gives ground, if I wanted to follow up, which you can do after dropping the Grudge Stone, then that means I would then be engaging all the enemy units at once. And it just depends whether you think that's a good idea from a Chaos perspective. So I think he chose to go... 2 inches away. So that situation might come up. Okay, it's time for combat. First of all, we've got a challenge. The Ranger Champion goes up against the Chaos Lord, because it's the most inexpensive resource I can send into the Lord. And I think in one good round of combat, I'm going to kill all the Forsaken, maybe all the Knights as well. It's very possible. So I accepted the challenge with the Ranger Champion, or the Veteran, who doesn't really cost any points. After this guy, anyone else accepting a challenge is going to cost points if they die. The cheapest one is probably the Runesmith, who is 68 points. Burlock Daminson's only 85, so even if this guy's in combat with me for the entire game, each round I do have some inexpensive characters to feed him. And that's maybe a good reason to put even more characters in this list. Some little cheap ones, like minimum engineers that you can throw into challenges for situations like this. Since you're unbreakable anyway, it doesn't matter if you keep losing combat over and over again. As long as you're killing other stuff as well, it's not just an endless line of challenges dying to a dragon, because then you will eventually lose by attrition. So, with my opponent's attacks, 6 rangers are killed, and then it's my turn to strike. Almost. Yeah, so my opponent actually gets up to 14 after all the units fought there. So 14 total combat res. And I got to 19 total combat res. So I killed all but one Chaos Knight, killed all the Forsaken, and yeah, dead. And I had a lot of attacks into the Forsaken. Because the dragon was in a challenge, all these ones were attacking the Forsaken, and also like the 30 guys off camera to the left were also hitting, because that's just the quirks of Linehammer. Which, for the record, anyone who's not familiar with my stance on Linehammer, they should totally take this out the game. But they can't just take it out on its own. You have to do something with infantry, fix them, before you take this out as well, because it does look silly, and this is purely as a hilarious experiment that my opponent knew he was getting into beforehand. So I wouldn't condone necessarily running a line of 60 rangers at a tournament. Although you never know. So, the dragon flees after losing combat by, how much was it, about 5. And the one remaining Chaos Knight flees as well. But obviously I can't pursue because I've dropped the Grudge Stone, so all I can do is follow up and reform. At this point, this unit of Chaos Chosen must be thinking, do we actually want to charge into the line on our own? I think charging in for this unit here is a bad idea. I think they would be absolutely massacred and they wouldn't have any support. If they don't charge in, they're going to have to eat a full round of shooting from this side of the line, and then a stand and shoot. On top of that, I think that's preferable to charging in and being obliterated, because you're still going to take the stand and shoot, even if you lose, let's say, 3, which is optimistic from the Chaos perspective to just lose 3, because any 6s to wound on those are going to have AP2 from the Armor Bane, even on the throwing axes, so you may well lose some Chaos Warriors from that. And then in combat, how much damage are you realistically going to do? Are you going to initiate a challenge? Because if you do, who would you choose? The Sorcerer probably wouldn't stand up very well, so you'd maybe challenge with a Champion, which would then allow, like my BSB, to get full attacks. Thorgrim Ulexon is there, he's going to get full attacks, because he's going to be in base contact. So, I don't think this unit going in on their own is a good idea. So in my turn, I start blasting at the Chaos Warriors, at the Chosen. I do manage to buff up the armor. By the way, I should point out that I think it's is it called the Infernal Puppet that the Chaos Sorcerer Lord has, that forces you to roll 3 dice and choose the 2 lowest for spellcasting, which I'm informed also affects bound spells as well. Okay. So yeah, not much happens there. Just kill a Chaos Chosen. I think not many. It may just be 1 or 2 I killed there. How many were hanging off the end of the line? Let's have a look. Okay, so about 3, which is about right from shooting, because they do have good armour, those Chaos Chosen. So I wouldn't expect to do too many more than that. So Giovanni says the puppet doesn't affect the anvil. Good to know. Gemmel says I haven't seen a line that size since 2001. Into turn 3 for Chaos. So, Demonic Vigour is cast onto the Chosen, but are they actually going to charge? The Chaos Lord rallies as well. So they choose not to charge. The Chaos Knight, on his own, the lone standard bearer, is still fleeing. It's very difficult to rally now that you're down to 1 out of 5, so you're below 25%, so you're going to keep on running, probably. So, yeah, choosing not to charge, I think that was the right move, because you want to go in as a combo, definitely. Turn 4, for me. So the anvil, and my shooting, I try to unleash. The anvil doesn't successfully buff the armour of the rangers, sadly. But with all my shooting, I kill... Let's see... Not a lot, actually. Obviously, the anvil can try and magic missile the Chaos Lord, but this Lord on Dragon also has magic resistance too, for the record. So I was finding that difficult to get through with the anvil's magic missile. So it is a large target, of course, so the anvil can see it. At this point, if you're the Chaos player, in a tournament setting, you'd probably run away. Because I think you're going to die whatever happens next. And I don't see how this list could have actually killed the line. Maybe with different spell selection, there may be some spells that could do something to this, but I'm struggling to think of any. Turn 4 for Chaos. So Gathering Darkness is cast on the line. By the way, you may notice that they're not just all rangers and crossbows, there's also some great weapon warriors that I've proxied in there as extra rangers. And I haven't even touched up the paintwork on these guys since 2000, yeah, 2000-ish, these great weapon warriors, because I was just never going to use them, because dwarf warriors aren't that good. But they've got great weapons, the rangers have great weapons, so they're good stand-ins. So if I decided to do any kind of shenanigans with this long term, then like this guy, you can see doesn't have the extra blue highlights on the clothing there. So stand and shoot, score 3 on the Forsaken. And again, we're in the situation where if the dragon doesn't get into a challenge, there's going to be like 30 rangers punching him with great axes. If he does get into a challenge, then all those attacks will go into the Forsaken instead. So I don't know what's preferable from a Chaos perspective, because you're already 3 down on combat res. Burlock Daminson accepts the challenge because he's inexpensive, and we've already got a second source of leadership 10, so he's not that important right now. And you can see that my opponent has scored 9 for combat res. I scored 17 because I've gone onto this row as well. So that is a huge win for the Dwarves. Murdered all the Chaos Chosen. The Sorcerer's still alive. The Dragon's alive, but they're both running away. Phil says, I'm only taking 20 Rangers and 10 Iron Drakes. Currently I plan on using the Rangers in 2 lines, but we'll see how the tournament goes. Perhaps they have to expand. I think a line of Rangers is pretty hot right now. You do have to be careful though. And we'll have a bit more discussion on just the general principles of lines at the end of this game. So, obviously, this has gone very badly for the Forces of Chaos. I don't see what they could have done too differently. Turn 5. So, blasting the dragon. Do some wounds to it, which is nice with the crossbows. And there. I'm not moving because I've dropped the Grudge Stone. Turn 5 for the enemy. Dragon rallies. The Sorcerer does not. Probably the wisest Chaos minion on the battlefield, just fleeing for the hills. Great idea, because you're going to get killed otherwise. And then in the next turn, the dragon takes some more shooting damage. And then in enemy turn 6, the Chaos Knight runs off the table. The dragon charges in, takes 4 wounds from a stand and shoot, and gets down to his last wound in combat. Issues a challenge. I then accept with Thorgrim Ullexson, the general of the army. I could have accepted with the BSB, because obviously it's a risk throwing in the general, who is also the source of Unbreakable, into a challenge. But because the game's already won, and it's just for cinematic purposes, so I throw Thorgrim in there to try and kill the dragon once and for all. And alas, he kills Thorgrim and wins the combat, in fact. But obviously the dwarves are unbreakable, so I know they're not unbreakable anymore because he died. So if they'd lost in the previous rounds, they wouldn't have cared. But then when we add up all the other combat stats, such as my BSB and the 2 runes of battle, it's actually a draw, and I win via having a musician. There we go. So the general gets himself killed, but in a tournament setting, obviously he wouldn't need to do that. And then the Chaos Dragon flees as well, just to add insult to injury. So that's fleeing at the end of the game. The Sorcerer's fleeing at the end of the game. He hadn't reached the edge. And the line is almost untouched. There's not a significant amount of damage into the line at all. And I could have easily just thrown in the BSB, and that probably wouldn't have died because it's got more wounds than Thorgrim. So, there we go. That's how many Rangers and Burlock Daminson got killed, and of course, Thorgrim. So, that was obviously quite difficult for the Forces of Chaos there. What would you do differently in that situation? Because the wider you are, obviously, the more attacks you have first when you charge into the line. But the wider you are, the more stand and shoots you're having against you. Especially if you're really close, then you can limit that stand and shoot by being narrow. And you just don't do enough damage to them. Oh yeah, I should also point out, Thorgrim Ullexson, once he's dropped the Grudge Stone, the unit gets hatred against everything, not just orcs and goblins. So, yep, a line of 60 rangers with 30-inch crossbows, and great weapons with hatred, and they're unbreakable. Leadership 10 anyway, with a 5-up ward save. What are the hard counters to this? Because it's stacking up 4 default combat res, even if they do 0 damage. Are there some ethereal units that can guarantee a combat win against that? Because obviously they would be a counter to it. You would have to find a point on the line where the characters aren't hanging out, because they have magical attacks, like the BSB I gave a magical great weapon to. Thorgrim Ullexson has a magical hammer. So you would have to be careful exactly where in the line you go in, and if I see I'm coming up against ethereal units, maybe I would deploy my characters in a position in the line that allows them to be relevant to that fight. So you've got to watch out for that. Combo charging with an ethereal unit is something to think about as well. So, if you're at the end of the line here with a big unit of, let's say, Chaos Warriors. Actually, let's not say Chaos Warriors, because then you wouldn't have an ethereal unit with you. Let's say Bretonnian Knights. You charge in, you've survived the stand and shoot. You've also charged in a Green Knight here. So all these Dwarf Rangers, all like 40 or 50 of them, down to the left-hand side, would have to direct their attacks into the Green Knight, that they can't physically hurt. So that is one way you can try and shut down the line. By... It doesn't necessarily have to be something ethereal, it can just be something that can tank damage very well, something that has a ward save and regeneration perhaps. Because obviously if they wound you, some of those are going to be 6s, and that's going to be cutting through all your armour anyway because the runesmith's in there, so there's just no armour saves possible against a 6 with the great weapons in this unit. Can you try and kill the characters perhaps and get rid of some of the rules that are beefing them up? If you get rid of the runesmith or Thorgrim to get rid of the unbreakable. It's very tricky. Do you dance around the line and avoid it? That's definitely something you could try, but they're rangers with crossbows, so they can move forward and then later in the game start shooting you. Can you dance over them with flyers? There's not going to be much for you to kill in the backfield, because I don't think the anvil is an optimal choice in this list. You really want it to all be in this one mega unit, with just the 2 units for legality purposes. And I think Dwarf Warriors are a good choice for that, because 2 units of them are less than 100 points. So even if somebody manages to kill them and then avoid all damage themselves, they still don't get a win, because they've only scored 80 points. And you need 100 points in the square-based events to qualify as a win. So the worst case scenario would be a draw, unless you can also get one of the characters in the line killed as well, which means you're engaging the line. So I want to hear from the audience, from the people out there in the community. First of all, what kind of line would you put up against this? Do you have a line in your army you can build that you think would take on these rangers? And do you have anything that isn't a line that you think could take them on? Do you have a winning strategy against this line? I'm going to put out this challenge at the club every now and then and let people bring whatever they want to try and beat the line. It's like a puzzle. It's not really a proper Warhammer battle, it is just a puzzle. Do you have the puzzle pieces that you can put together to crack this ridiculous code that I've been conjuring up like some kind of deranged, disgraced scientist in a secret underground lab somewhere? I'm going to keep tweaking it. I'm going to add more characters probably to the line. And depending on opposition, I'm going to look into possibly adding the second rank as well. You do have to be careful with the second rank, because if people charge in from the front and the rear, and you've got a second rank, then I think technically the rear rank would actually be quite small, that fighting rank then, wouldn't it? So you wouldn't be able to then hit backwards with as many guys if there was anything hitting the front rank as well. If you only hit the rear, then I think the whole frontage would just become the fighting rank with the part second rank. I think that's how it works. So combo charging, there are weird rules interactions you can use against this. You can't move it is the key thing, because it's unbreakable. So the only thing it could do is give ground, and it can't do that because I've got units up against them. I've got terrain behind there as well that you can't give ground past. So it's an immovable object. Do you have an unstoppable force in your army lists out there that you think could deal with this? If so, let me know in the comments. Let the community know how to deal with this ridiculousness. And let's have a look at the comments now, actually. Why not fly dragon over another side and attack from all sides? I think the issue with that is because the dragon is going to get there. It was getting there at the same time as the big infantry line. The more time you spend with the dragon jumping over and staring at me, the more rounds of shooting you take. And then even if the dragon charges into the rear, all you get is it +2 on the combat res? So it's not going to do that much. And you've lost yourself a turn of fighting because you jumped over the back first instead of charging. And then the stand and shoot would still rack up a load of hits against the front unit. And I think it would be a very similar situation. It would help your combat res a little bit, so obviously if you can attack on multiple fronts and get the extra combat res from attacking another facing, then that would be good, but can you sacrifice a turn of combat to do that? I don't know if a combat army is the way to go, really. If you've got a really beefy unit, let's think, what is there out there? What about the Skin Wolf Death Star? How would that do against this? Because that can rack up all kinds of extra toughness and saves on that unit. Something like that, a Mega Death Star that has loads of really good saves. The armor save is almost irrelevant because of the AP/armor bane that's coming at you. So you really need the ward saves and regeneration to face this. So what spells could deal with this? Now, there is is it the Gaze of Gork? The spell that's just in a long line that hits every single model the line crosses. If you could get a shaman into position to use that, that would be hilarious. But of course the line can be wider, so until you've shot some of them down, there just isn't a flank. Because the line can actually go all the way across the table and fill it completely. Let's see. Griefer says, what's the point with the giant line? All the units, even if they're not in contact, can add one attack as support. Yes. So even if you just attack at one end, that's still 60 dwarves that can hit you with their great weapons, is the thinking behind it. And if you go super wide to combat them, then you're just inviting 60 crossbows for stand and shoot then. Or 60 throwing axes for stand and shoot. So it's a very difficult puzzle to solve, I think. Jamie says, could Wood Elves outshoot this and not take as much shooting back as skirmishers? Potentially. The problem is, would the Wood Elf shooting be able to kill enough of the unit by the end of the game to score the points for it? It would be tricky, because there's the ward save in there, and the rangers with the shields as well, they do have a 4-up save. It'd be difficult to kill enough of them, I think. And if you're killing, I suppose you would have the range superiority. Can you get Wood Elves with more than 30-inch range? I feel like you can. And you can also move and shoot and then move out of range with reserve moves as well with Wood Elves. So Wood Elves could be something that could shoot and then not be shot back at. The thing is, against Wood Elves who are looking to set that kind of thing up, I would just not set the Grudge Stone yet and move forwards with the line so that you can't physically escape from the range of the crossbows, I think. Which does give you opportunity then to attack before the unit is unbreakable, if you can come up with some way to attack it under those circumstances to take advantage of that. So there are ways you can play against it. I'm looking forward to seeing what people come up with as well. Because this kind of thing surely isn't going to be around forever. I'm sure the Warhammer rules team don't want the game to be played this way, because it is silly. But while it's in the rules, I think it's fun to just mess around with it, as long as people know what they're going to be up against. Again, I don't condone taking this to a tournament. Okay, back to the chat. Armando says, when you stand and shoot, does everyone get to shoot, or does the front arc come into play? Yes, you have to actually be able to draw a line of sight from the model that's shooting. So standing and shooting against a narrow unit is not going to have that many shots. If you're far away, there's going to be more of them shooting, obviously. If you're really close by with something like this dragon, you're only going to get, like, what, 6 of them able to see you? So that's going to be minimal stand and shoot if you're standing right there. And also just minimal shooting in general if you can get really close to the line. But the wider you are, which sometimes you want to do to counteract the line, you're just inviting more shooting and more stand and shoot. Jamie says, it's nice to see infantry monstering other stuff for a bit rather than vice versa. I definitely agree with that, actually. Anything that gives infantry the upper hand. And I think it's pretty cool. I think the issue is, obviously, competitively, people would not engage this. So if they've got a good place to hide, and they can avoid taking casualties to crossbows by hiding at the back of the table somehow, then potentially there could be some very boring games as a result of it. So that could be an issue. Let's see, another line of dwarves. That is something that could be fun, actually. 2 lines of dwarves against each other. And if they both took exactly the same list, it would obviously just come down to dice rolls. It'd be interesting to see what other dwarf players would like to put in their line that's different to what I've got in there, because I think Thorgrim, Ulexon and Burlock are a very good investment. It's nearly 350 points for the 2 of them, but with that you're not suffering -1 to shoot at long range, you're unbreakable, you get hatred against all enemy units, and you've got a bit of a beat stick character in there as well. So I think that's a good choice. I think the BSB with the Rune of Grungni is a good choice as well, giving them the ward save, because anytime you give a unit a ward save, if you can put it on a bigger unit, you're obviously spreading the cost of that ward save out over 60 of them instead of 10 of them. So you're getting good value on that, because it's an 85 point banner, so on a small unit it's not really worth doing, but when you get into 60 models, it's a 1,000 point unit before you've even put characters in there. So giving that unit a 5+ ward save is way better of an investment. And then a runesmith in there, he's inexpensive, adds to the magic resistance, and also gives them Armor Bane 2, or an additional Armor Bane 2. So the crossbows would go up to Armor Bane 4, and the great axes, when they roll a 6, would then go up to AP 5. So against big monsters, that's very scary as well, because you're often rolling a 6 to wound anyway, if they're like toughness 7. So you're just going to be completely denying their armor saves. I was musing on other things that could be an issue for the line. I was thinking about enemy war machines that could be an issue, and I couldn't really think of any, because even like Empire volley guns would have to deploy within range of the ranger line, and they're so far away that quite a few of them would be able to see and shoot back. So I think like 20 rangers shooting at a volley gun have got a pretty decent chance of killing it, because they're not suffering -1 to hit for long range, and then they're just looking for 6s to wound. So I don't know if war machines would do the job. Cannons obviously are only killing like 1 of them a turn. Stone throwers only have a small template, don't hit that many, and there's a ward save and high toughness, so I don't know, war machines might be a struggle. Let me know what you can come up with. Something like multiple sources of, like, Vile Tide, maybe? Something like that, so they just don't get an armor save, but then they've still got the ward save. And there's loads of them, so if you're coming into range to cast Vile Tide, you're probably in a range to get shot with the crossbows as well. But that's something that could do lots of damage if you can take multiple sources of that. How many sources of level 4 Vile Tide can you take in a Beastman list at 2,000 points? Robert says, jockeying the combat using cheap throwaway units or a War Eagle or Razor Gore type thing to soak up half the line's attacks or more when you hit the other part of the line. So this is something I was thinking about as well. Units that go in purely to try and tie up the line would be a prime stand and shoot target. So if you had like let's say a Razor Gore here, and a big unit that you care about there, or here, let's say. So you only want it to be touching like 10 of the rangers and all the rest would be touching the Razor Gore. I would probably think about directing my stand and shoot entirely into the Razor Gore, because even if I only get, how many wounds does it have, 3 or 4? I would only get small amount of combat res from it compared to your massive unit you've got here, where I could get more. but it would then mean that all the extra 40 great weapons can then attack your block. So you'd probably want to throw in 2 of them at the same time, because that way, even if I stand and shoot one of them, I'm still going to be wasting lots of attacks on a small unit. The issue is, you have to keep doing that turn on turn and stay in combat each time, because I've got good static combat res of 4 with the Runes of Battle. I'm going to be getting at least another like 4 or whatever the small unit is there that's going to die easily. So you have to be scoring good combat res just to stay in the fight. And this unit's unbreakable, so if you haven't got a good way to kill Thorgrim, then you have to keep chipping away at them, I suppose, and you need disposable units to throw in to tie up the line's attacks each turn. So, what would be good for that? What's fairly inexpensive? I don't know, because anything where you have that many of them, you're just cutting down your killing power on the rest of your army. Like, I'm thinking a dwarf list with loads of gyrocopters, throwing them in one at a time with another fighter unit on the end. And that would definitely help, but at the end of the day, the unit is unbreakable, and they're eventually going to get through all your gyrocopters. So they're getting points, and if your big unit on the end can kill... How many ranges a turn would you have to kill? It's going to take you at least a couple of turns to get there. You'd have to be killing like 15 or 20 a turn, ideally. And that's without taking casualties back taken into account as well. So it's a tough one, and I want to know what people come up with as the potential solution to this conundrum that I've cooked. Alright, let's have another look at the comments before we start wrapping this one up. Robert says, modifiers on the entire line are a good idea because the magic in the army isn't that strong. If you can get off any spells that put like -1 toughness on the line, anything like that is going to be good, just help you build up your combat res. I do think combat is going to be tricky. You really have to shenanigan your way into some kind of weirdness with it, with the positioning, because it's just so difficult when that grudge stone's down, when they all have hatred, and they're 60 wide. Without ethereal, it's looking very difficult, I think. Craig says, could a small unit... could a small unit break the attacks, given the line needs to attack nearest, soaking up damage, with death-dealing charges, the extreme, to win combat res? Yes, I think that is the way that you would approach the line in general. You want to attack one end of it and put weaker units that don't give up too much combat res further along the line to absorb the rest of the attacks. The issue is you have to make sure it's something that isn't going to die from stand and shoot before it gets there. So it has to have enough wounds to survive the stand and shoot, but few enough wounds so that it doesn't give away massive combat res. And I don't know if such a unit exists that isn't ethereal. Because if you put like 10... let's say 10 zombies, that is just 10 combat res they're giving away. And they could actually lose all of them on the stand and shoot if they're 10 wide. So that would be 10 combat res before anyone's even struck a blow. So finding the right unit for that job would be very difficult. Phil says, is stand and shoot split between attacking units? No, you just target one of the enemy units to stand and shoot against. So there's not going to be that many attacks going into that one unit if you're really close to them. With narrow frontage units, the stand and shoot isn't going to be significant. So going wide is the temptation against the line, because then you also get loads of attacks first. But the wider you are, the more stand and shoot can go into that one unit. Let's see. So challenges is an interesting issue for the line as well, because like the Chaos Dragon here issued a challenge in each turn, which meant I had to throw away a character each time. But I threw away the champion first, and then I was able to throw away some inexpensive heroes as well, before I actually got to the good ones. If you make a challenge, you have to keep in mind that that means you're opening up the line to attack the other units that you've combo charged with. Because while the dragon was here, and there was another unit fighting here, all these rangers have to put their attacks into the dragon. Which you might think is bad. From a dragon's perspective, you don't want to get killed, and there's a chance that that many rangers could just kill the dragon. But the dragon is tankier than the unit. So if you can put a triple save dragon somewhere into the line, and don't challenge with it, and make lots of the rangers attack the dragon, the dice would have to be on your side though, because there's a real possibility the dragon would just get killed by that many great weapons. So you have to be careful. If you've got something that's so tanky you're confident it can survive 30 or 40 great weapon attacks from the rangers, then by all means throw it in there, don't challenge, and just absorb all those attacks so your other unit doesn't have to deal with them. Because any kind of infantry unit you would expect to get absolutely whomped by the great weapons. I think the strength 5 of the attacks from the great weapons is also, I would argue, strength 5 is the best strength to be in Warhammer, because you're paying points, you're paying a premium every time you get a higher strength. So like hammerers going in at strength 6 with their weapons, you're paying a lot of points for those. You pay significantly less points to be strength 5, I think. And there aren't a lot of units in the game at strength 2, toughness 2. You fight a lot of toughness 3 and 4 units, so going in at strength 5, you're never really wasting any of that strength. When you're strength 6, enemy units that are strength 3, you're paying points for strength that you're not using there. So I think 5 is a really sweet spot. And it's also, strength 5 is high enough so that you can always wound an enemy on a 6, regardless of their toughness. And what's the strength where you can potentially be taken out of being able to wound something? Hold on, I've got the charts right here, actually. The to wound chart. Pulling it out right now. Here we go. To wound targets toughness. So if you are strength 4, you cannot wound toughness 10. So that's another reason why strength 5 I think is the best strength in the game. You can wound everything, and you're never wasting your strength on things that are just really feeble, because there's very few things you'll run into that are toughness 2. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Maybe snotlings, something like that. Let's see. -1 to hit in combat could be the way to limit its power. Like the Beastmen slug skin. Yep, -1 to hit would be good, but with Thorgrim in there, they do have hatred, so they can mitigate that a little bit, but still, every little helps. And if you can put a modifier across 60 models in one go, that is definitely going to help you. The other reason Thorgrim is I like him for this role, actually, of the Unbreakable and the hatred against everything, is the fact that he's -1 to hit against in combat. So the chances of rank and file troops actually killing him from within the line is quite slim. If they put a big hero in there, they're still going to be -1 to hit. And like a big dragon, if you put him up against Thorgrim, that's a little bit risky because his weapon does d6 damage. So you're putting yourself in the danger zone there to try and get rid of the Unbreakable. So yeah, I do like him a lot in this role. Obviously, Rangers, the one bit of wastage you do have is that you're paying points for their ability to scout. And if you want to put heroes in there, you can only scout them like 3 inches outside your deployment zone, otherwise the heroes just won't be able to get there. So what you can do, though, is kind of have a diagonal line and have it just hanging into your deployment zone, so the heroes can go straight in there in turn 1. If the terrain setup means a diagonal line would allow you to avoid buildings and such, that could be something to try. Back to the comments. Robert, not challenging with something that hits hard. Yep. Challenging, definitely something to think about. Craig, you can avoid standard shoot by being within the move range of standard units. Random moves can't be standard shot. Yes, so that's another thing. So first of all, being close to them and then charging. The only thing I can stand and shoot with then is the throwing axes, which is why they're an important part of the unit makeup as well, because the enemy will try and get really close to you before charging. Because not only does it limit which weapons can be used, it also limits how many of the unit can see you as well. The further away you are, the more of them are going to be able to have you within their sight arc. So you do want to get closer. So the throwing axes are very important to have, so you can always stand and shoot even at point blank range. And yes, anything with random move can avoid the stand and shoot. I'm not sure there's anything in the game that has random move that would not get whooped by the line. If you have enough of them, perhaps. So you will totally avoid the stand and shoot, because things like squig hoppers, if you were just charging, you would take so much damage from the stand and shoot, it would be terrible. So if you had a really huge amount of squig hoppers, perhaps, that were random moving into combat, avoiding the stand and shoot, what would you combo in with them? You could put the mangler squigs in with them as well, perhaps. It would be interesting. If you can ever win a round of combat against the line, then you're halfway there. Because it's when you bounce off that you get the issue, because then the shooting phase is opened up again in the next dwarf turn, and then when you charge in again, the stand and shoot is back. So that's 2 rounds of shooting that you're going to suffer purely because you lost a combat. If you can win, and then when the line gives ground, if you can follow, or in this case they wouldn't give ground at all because there's nowhere to go. So if you can stay touching them, you've got them tied up, so any other units that you can get in there. It's easier said than done though, because you would have to survive your turn and the dwarf turn and still be in combat in order for another unit to charge in and not take a stand and shoot. So I would like to see what lists people come up with, what strategies people try to employ against this. And at the game club, I have let people know that I'm going to be doing this semi-regularly as well, bringing this just the mega line of Doom, tweaking it to make the ultimate line, and then asking if anyone wants to challenge it and seeing what people turn up with. I do think someone could put together an ethereal list that would cause it trouble. So we'll see what people come up with, because there are some really good players at the club, as you may have seen from all my battle reports where I get whooped. Robert says, I would consider taking only the line and the 2 warrior units than adding more characters. That's what I'm thinking, because the anvil would just give up points, I think. So who could we add in there as a character instead of the anvil? Do we have any other fighty characters we could put in there? I could just put a king in there. A fighty king with all ruined up to the eyeballs. We could... Do we have any more named characters we could put in? You can't put Ungrim in the unit, unfortunately. At least I don't think you can. Let me have a look. Let's see. Maybe, actually. Because if the Grudgestone has been set, could Ungrim then join the unit? Because it's unbreakable at that point. So he can join unbreakable units. That's interesting. The problem is, he wouldn't be able to go in there immediately. You would have to probably deploy Thorgrim in there, set the Grudgestone at the start of turn 1, and then maybe Ungrim can move in there. I'll have to double check. But if you can put Ungrim in there as well, that would be pretty hilarious. So he's a bit more expensive than an anvil, but it would be funny having him in there as well. So we'd have Burlock, Thorgrim and Ungrim all in the same unit, potentially. Yes. Interesting times ahead. Robert says, the machine gun engineer runesmith could be useful even to start outside the line, then maybe move in. Yes, the machine gun Thane was something I was considering. With the range of the unit, I also considered giving him a crossbow instead of a handgun, so he would match the rest of the unit. And because it's a magical crossbow, that lets you spread out your magical attacks a bit more down the line. So if you try and position him somewhere where an enemy ethereal unit could come from, like if you put him in front of some woods in case the Green Knight pops up, you would then get a magical stand and shoot against the Green Knight, which would be good. So yeah, hopefully people found this entertaining and interesting and puzzling and befuddling and bewildering. Yes, so I'll tweak the line, I'll put the word out, people will bring what they think is a good counter to the line, and we'll see how it does. Linehammer is real, baby, and it's here to stay. Okay, let's wrap this video up. Don't forget that if you appreciate people breaking Warhammer with line-based nonsense, why not pledge your entire life savings to the Patreon or the PayPal links in the description, which will just allow me to buy more Rangers, probably, and make an even longer line. I think you can actually fit a line of about 70 or like 68 of them on the table with the characters thrown in as well, in one line before you have to get to a second rank. So I could expand the unit even more. So why not give me all your money so I can do that? If you want to facilitate this kind of horrific behaviour, then it's on you, really. Don't forget to check out all the social media shenanigans down there. There's Facebook group, Twitter, Discord server, and on Blue Sky as well now. I'm not sure if I've added the link to the description yet, but it's just Andy2D6 on Blue Sky. We'll see who wins the war between Twitter and Blue Sky. I'm playing both sides, so I always come out on top. I'm just posting the same thing on both of them at the moment. We've got Bad Squiddo in the chat, turning up to Tut at the Linehammer. Yep, Linehammer's real. What are you going to do about it? That's my message to the community. That's the question I'm posing. What are you going to do about Linehammer? What you going to do when Linehammer runs wild on you? And all that remains to be said is, good night out there, whatever you are.